Welcome to Course 3, Unit 4. In the previous 3 units, we introduced all the different development stages of an international standard, the levels of consensus that need to be reached for the document to be published, and the stages that can be skipped. In this unit, we will look in a bit more detail at who does what at every stage. Before going further, make sure you understand the development stages, how we build consensus, and what conditions allow us to skip stages from the previous 3 units. So what actually happens at every stage of development? If you remember, these are the 7 stages, starting with the preliminary work item right through to the final published standard. To make it easier to remember, we will be using some recognisable symbols on the following slides. The cogs denote general information and characteristics about a particular step. The upwards facing arrow means something that happens before the ballot. The ballot box is for the actual ballot, and the downward facing arrow is something that happens after the ballot or as a result of the ballot. Let's start at the beginning with the preliminary stage. Remember that this is one of the optional stages that can be skipped. Usually it's used to work on proposals which are not yet sufficiently mature for going to a further stage. For instance, it might be to do with an emerging technology or something where there are not yet enough experts committed to working on it. It is often an ad hoc group that would work on a preliminary work item, rather than a working group, who instead dedicate their time to working on projects that have been approved and have target dates. The preliminary work item doesn't yet have any target dates, although there may be unofficial dates which are not yet registered in the system. The committee has 3 years to move to a new work item proposal, or else the project gets automatically cancelled. While not all new work item proposals include a draft with the ballot, it's most helpful to have one if possible. The preliminary stage is when this draft would be developed. But there should be no detailed work done on the draft at this stage, as the work could be wasted if the new work item proposal is rejected. There is no ballot needed to move on to the proposal stage. This is one of the mandatory stages, and it's the first time that the project will be scrutinised by committee members as to its global and market relevance. A new work item proposal applies to all new standards. Revisions don't have to go through the proposal stage unless there is a change to the scope from the previous edition. It also applies to new parts of multi-part standards, publicly available specifications, and technical specifications. The project is presented using Form 4, which includes details such as the scope of the project, justification for its development, and the type of deliverable. Most often, new work item proposals are introduced by a national body, but they can also be initiated by the Secretariat of the Committee, a Category A liaison, the Technical Management Board, or the ISO Central Secretariat Secretary General. At this stage, the proposer should make every effort to include a draft for discussion, or at least an outline of the document. They should also nominate a project leader and provide a project plan with target date. The Secretariat can request clarifications if necessary, but they cannot refuse a new work item proposal. The Secretariat is responsible for filling out the Form 4 in conjunction with the proposer, and they initiate the ballot. New work items cannot be approved by a show of hands at a meeting. The decision has to be made by a committee ballot, which is usually 12 weeks. Approval requires 2/3 majority of the P members voting and there must be a commitment to participate from 5 P members, or it can be 4 P members if there are fewer than 16 P members in the committee. Abstentions are not counted, and any negative vote must be properly justified. If the experts are not named by national bodies when voting, this can result in the project not starting. After the ballot, the Secretary has the responsibility of circulating the voting results and completing the administrative post-voting decision process within 1 month. If it is approved, then the project will be registered in the committee's programme of work and the clock starts ticking. The preparatory stage is optional. As we've seen, it might be that there is already a draft that is mature enough to proceed straight to a later stage without further discussion in a working group. If you do decide to go through the preparatory stage, the project will either be assigned to an existing working group or there will be a new working group set up specifically to work on this project. Whichever is the case, that working group should have a meeting scheduled soon after the new project has been approved. This first meeting needs to be planned already when the project proposal is submitted. While keeping to the agreed target date, the working group then works on the draft, which may undergo several revisions before consensus is achieved, and it can be submitted to the committee draft stage. There is no ballot during the preparatory stage. Instead, the working group can launch consultations among experts. This is not like a vote with a yes or no answer. It's more like a discussion. The committee stage is optional, but in many cases, it is a key stage of consensus building when comments from national bodies are considered. Skipping the committee stage requires a 1-month ballot, or it needs to be agreed during a plenary meeting. Before the ballot, the committee stage starts with the working draft being submitted for registration as a committee draft. Then, the Secretariat of the committee launches the ballot for all the committee's members. That means P members, O members, and liaisons. The duration is 8 weeks by default, although this can be extended to 12 or 16 weeks if necessary. For example, some bodies might want a longer period to consult with their national mirror committees. Then the national bodies provide comments, both technical and editorial, and indicate whether they agree to move to this. After the ballot has ended, the Secretary then compiles all the comments and the committee leadership decides on the next step, which might be to discuss the committee draft at another meeting, revise the committee draft for another ballot, or register it for the DIS ballot. It's the responsibility of the project leader to show how the comments have been resolved and to prepare a new draft for the next stage. As you know by now, the inquiry stage is mandatory. This is the principal stage when all ISO members get to vote on the draft to approve publication or not, and to submit their comments for consideration. This is the last stage at which technical comments can be considered. The committee submits their approved committee draft for registration as a draft international standard. Whereas previous ballots have been ballots internal to the committee and launched by the Secretary, at this stage, the Secretariat must submit the draft and its accompanying documents to ISO Central Secretariat, who then initiate the DIS ballot that will go to all ISO members. After an 8-week translation period, the DIS ballot can start for a duration of 12 weeks. The acceptance criteria are a 2/3 majority of voting P members and no more than a quarter of all the votes cast to be negative. Negative votes must be justified by technical reasons, or else they are not counted. ISO Central Secretariat edits the document during the DIS ballot so that it will be in good shape for publication after the ballot, and so that any serious concerns can be picked up before the final stages. After the ballot closes, the Secretariat has a limit of 12 weeks to circulate the report of voting. The document will go straight to publication if the approval criteria are met and there are no technical changes to be made. If the criteria are met, but technical changes must be incorporated, then the draft will be modified accordingly and then registered at the approval stage as a final draft international standard. If the document is not approved, then the committee leadership can either circulate a revised DIS for another ballot, they could go back to the committee draft stage for another ballot, or wait to discuss the ballot results and the comments at the next meeting. The inquiry stage ends with registration of the text for circulation as an FDIS, or for publication. The approval stage is mandatory unless the DIS was approved without technical comments. The FDIS ballot is a yes or no vote for publication, and it's the last stage at which ISO members vote on the draft. Only editorial changes can be made at this late stage. No technical comments will be considered. So, before the vote, committees submit their drafts for registration as an FDIS. The Secretariat then submits the draft to ISO Central Secretariat, who will then initiate the ballot. The ballot lasts for 8 weeks, during which time ISO Central Secretariat will check the document again. As before, the approval criteria are 2/3 majority of voting P members and no more than a quarter of all votes cast to be negative. Technical comments cannot be incorporated at this stage, so will be kept for consideration at the next revision of the document. If the draft is approved, then it goes to publication. If not, then the committee can resubmit the draft as a committee draft, a draft international standard, or another final draft international standard. Or they can publish it as a technical specification or a publicly available specification, both of which require lower levels of consensus. Or they can cancel the project entirely. The publication stage is when ISO corrects any editorial errors that were spotted during the FDIS. It then goes to the committee for a final proof before being published.